Greetings shippers, welcome back, and it's time for another episode of Fanversations. Today we're once more joined by StickyKeys, aka Stacy, of the BHAD podcast. The last time she was here, we talked all about Steric, and today we are going to tackle ABO. That's right, Alpha, Beta, Omega. We're going to talk about all of it, so get ready. Mostly safe for work. Let's say safe for work. Also, I've begun to post all of these Fanversations over on my Patreon on my RSS feed. That means that if you're subscribed to me on Patreon, you can just download the link and listen on whatever app you prefer. Also, I will be releasing episodes as soon as they're done there, which means they'll get up there a bit faster than they'll get here. Give me a thumbs up to let me know that you're liking these, and I'm very excited to get into ABO, and I hope you are too. So, let's get started.
I was getting set up, and really I was trying to figure out my hair situation. And then finally I was just like, you know what? We're just going to be wild today. We're talking about ABO. We're going into the wild brush of fandom.
Exactly. Greetings, shippers. It's Sasha here with
StickyKeys. Hi.
Back again because we have more to talk about.
Yes, so much more. I'm so excited.
Yeah, this time we're going to dive into ABO, which we only briefly scratched the surface of in the Steric video, which is surprising because it is such a large part of the Steric fandom and just Teen Wolf in general. Yeah. But we're going to dive into all of the wonder that is ABO, and that there's definitely more to it than people think, because I find that when people think of ABO, either they don't know what it is, because despite being so large, you can still avoid it depending on what fandom you're in, or if you just don't understand the tag, you might not click on it because you don't know what's going on. But also, it has that reputation for being very, very smutty and very, very filthy, which, not that it hasn't earned it. Like, not that it hasn't earned it, because it definitely can be, but because of that, a lot of times people focus on that, and they don't really look at the other things that ABO has to offer. So basically, let's start off with, what is your experience with ABO?
So, I was thinking about this. I was like, how are we going to break this down? And I was like, you kind of have two things. First of all, the kind of definition of ABO. Mm-hmm. I think when a lot of people think of the ABO, I don't necessarily see it as being a cross-fandom thing, although I've seen it in a lot of fandoms, but I usually see it within Teen Wolf, Supernatural, because, of course, you're dealing with werewolves.
Yes.
So when people automatically think of ABO, they think of Alpha, Beta, Omega. But in this case, we're not necessarily talking about werewolf pack hierarchy. Mm-hmm. Although when you mesh the two, it can make a lot of fun things. We'll talk about that later. My experience with fanfic in general, I have never been one that has enjoyed content outside of the canon text. I was not one of those people. When social media started kind of interacting with the show, I was resistant. I was one of those people like, no, if it didn't happen on the screen, I don't like it. And the closest I would get is there used to be a website that did recaps of different shows, Television Without Pity. And I was a huge Lost fan, love Lost. And so I would read their recaps, and we have forums where we talk about the episodes. And so then you see more and more people were like doing things like, oh, come to this Twitter live tweet and ask the creator questions. And I'm like, no, I don't want that. I want the world. I want the smoke monster. And so Teen Wolf was really one of the first teen shows to really kind of integrate social media, but it also kind of fostered this explosion of fan created content. Mm-hmm. And when you were talking about fan fiction, all that stuff in general. And oddly enough, and this is going to sound so backwards, but when I started reading fan fiction, I was like, I refuse to read anything that's not a werewolf AU, because I'm like, it's Teen Wolf, we're werewolves. That's what we're doing here, you know. And usually it's kind of the other way around. People kind of find out what's closer to them, and then they like to see the characters kind of in those situations. So we get, human bakery AUs and coffee and that kind of thing. And I was like, no, I want werewolves. I want, supernatural creatures. If we're going to do this, we're doing this all the way. So I had started hearing about ABO, and I'm always such a slippery slope kind of person. I find that if I see something that I'm not sure about, I'm like, ooh, no, that's too much. I don't like that. And then I'm like, I love it. And so I think I started reading Skiles. Like Skittles was really kind of my first Teen Wolf like fan fiction kind of thing. And one of the very first fics I read in that fandom was Styles was in Heat and Scott was a Heat counselor or something. And so he was hired to help Styles get through his Heat. And I was like, what is this? Like, what are they talking about? I don't understand. And so, of course, then that led to a rabbit hole of being like,
yeah,
what is this? And that kind of thing. And so I started really seeing a lot of the allegories and a lot of the metaphors that the stories were telling. And, once you kind of come to the understanding that a lot of the writers are female, then it's like, oh, I can kind of see where this story came from. I can see what you were actually saying here and how you were using these different characters to say it. And so thus began the love affair with ABO. And of course, the smutty portions.
Of course.
1,000%. I was actually just about to pull our little Discord and be like, for those of you who aren't into ABO, give me some reasons like why. What are your thoughts on it? And we can also talk about that a little bit later too. But it inspires a lot of severe initial reaction.
Yes.
And then it kind of melts down where you're like, well, I just really don't like this aspect, or, this aspect kind of makes me mad. So it's very textured.
Yeah, because I encountered it in one of the fandoms outside of the supernatural element entirely. I first encountered it in the Marvel fandom when I was going through a Winter Iron phase. So Tony Stark and Bucky Barnes. And I found this fic where it was that everybody thought that Tony was an alpha, but he was a secret beta, and he was trying to live his life up to these alpha standards. And so my first encounter with it was this one that was really dealing with all of the societal aspects of what it meant to have these concrete roles inside society and how they contrasted with how a person presented themselves on the exterior or how someone expected them to present. And so I was like, oh, this is really interesting. You can do a lot with this. And of course, smut. Of course, there was that. Yeah. But it was just, I saw that there were so many different ways that you could take it, especially because initially for me, it was divorced from that supernatural element. And then when I got more into it and I saw where it actually originated from, I was like, okay, well, that makes a lot more sense. And now I understand why there's so much nodding and all of this stuff happening.
I know, when I first read about nodding, I was like, that just sounds uncomfortable. I'm not. But then you read, and now I'm just like nodding or die. Like, if there's no nodding, what are we doing here? What are we doing? ABO or not? What's happening? I love it. It's so funny.
And the thing with ABO too is that there are so many levels of it. But even within the tagging system, you can't really explain how far into it you're going or not. So really the only way to know is to read the person's fic and see what they're doing with it. And I think that's also why it inspires all of those different reactions, because there are so many things that end up being tied into it that they don't necessarily have to be a part of ABO, like MPreg and all of that stuff. And MPreg just in general makes a lot of people uncomfortable. So
I love it. Well, that's exactly, and I was thinking about that too, because I said you have ABO kind of at this very alpha level.
Yeah.
And then splitting down, you get into heats, you get into mating, and then you get into MPreg, and you kind of have these prongs, but those can kind of exist
outside. Yeah.
Or ABO, right? And so when someone says ABO, it literally brings up this minefield of which way are you going?
Yeah.
what can we talk about, and that kind of thing. I'm going to talk about it all because it all enthralls me.
Yeah, I find it really fascinating. But the thing that's difficult, I think, for so many people and so many fans is because it also is that complex AU element to it.
Right.
And like you were saying, when you first get into fandom, a lot of times you want to stick a bit closer to what the canon is, especially if you're just starting out. I actually got a comment in one of my videos that was like, I don't understand why people branch so far out into, say, like a bakery, coffee shop AU, because then aren't you just writing something completely different? But fandom can be, it doesn't have to be, but it can be this kind of expanding experience where the more you get into it, the more you want to explore. And with certain fandoms where ABO is so prominent, I can understand why there can be that bit of a backlash to it, because it's so intense to just go in like, oh, I'm going to read some fan fiction. And then the first thing you find is...
It is. It does have that kind of connection to it where it is both in canon, it can be made canon, but then it can also be removed from it.
Yeah.
And you have a way of kind of expanding on these characters and seeing them in different situations. When we talk about, Styles getting impregged and having a baby and being an Omega and, that kind of thing, it's not like, oh, well, you just want to see Dylan O'Brien pregnant. I'm like, But no, it's more about having someone with that history, with that backstory, and how would they react in this other kind of situation.
Yeah.
And especially when you get to the point where you start internalizing and you see a lot of yourself in that character, it's really a way to kind of explore how you would react, or, if you were in this position, how those two reactions kind of mesh together. I think what might be good, let's do a good kind of general definition of ABO, just so we can make sure everyone's on the same page. I know when I started reading fic, especially a lot of the older fics, the newer ones not so much, because they expect you to kind of be on board at this point.
Yeah.
But the newer ones be like, here is a link to a manifesto on what my ABO is. And, you would have all like, okay, this is what an alpha is, this is what a beta is, this is what an omega is, and here's how they interact in my verse. And it would be these huge primers, and they would be necessary. And like really, but once you got that, you're like, all right, I'm in, let's do this. That's a lot of fun.
It's kind of to the point now where people assume that you already know what it is. And so when you get people who don't know what it is, and a lot of times I feel they're a bit shy or embarrassed to ask, because no one wants to seem like a fandom noob and be like, what's ABO? Everybody seems to know what's going on, and I don't. And that was part of why I made the video about it, because I kept seeing it pop up where they're like, what is Alpha, Beta, Omega? I don't understand it. What is happening? So for those who didn't watch that video, Alpha, Beta, Omega is basically an AU-ish type of universe where it operates on the rules that there are 3 distinct classes within society, although there can be 2, but it depends what we're working with. But they tend to be alphas, betas, and omegas. And they all have their own designated roles within society that are biologically driven that determine the way that they interact with one another, with alphas being on the top and betas being kind of on the bottom, and omegas often being this coveted, prized, special class, although they can also vary.
This is actually something that's very interesting, because when I came into ABO, it was opposite. And so I love the idea of this. We talk about cause and effect a lot. And a lot of the complaints that I see about Alpha, Omega, or ABO fics is, oh, well, the Omega is always this lowly, low-class kind of bottom of the barrel kind of thing. And then you have to tell people, well, that was at a very kind of specific time. In response to that, we ended up getting, oh, no, the Omega is this coveted,
prized, special,
very special kind of different thing. And then the kind of backlash to that is like, oh, Omegas are, they know that they're prized, but they're just trying to live their lives. That kind of thing. And so, it's very interesting. But I usually see one of the 2 variations, either Omegas or what I see a lot, especially in supernatural fics, is 2 humans Omegas will be like, ugh, trashed, and we don't like it. But to the werewolf class, who are kind of the minorities in that sense, they're very prized because that's how it's kind of been in their culture. And so then you get to deal with that little dichotomy, and it's always tons of fun.
I kind of want to go back to what you were saying near to the beginning about how it can be this powerful expression of femininity, since so many of the writers are female. Not that there aren't male writers, because there are, but an overwhelming portion of fandom does still happen to be female in a lot of segments. And so a lot of the fics are written by women, because one of the complaints that's often leveled against ABO is that it's sexist. I've seen that a lot, that it's this sexist work full of internalized misogyny, erasing women from existence. But that's only one way to look at it, because there are other ways to look at it where it is quite empowering, like you were mentioning, how you come to identify with these characters, and so you're finding a way to place your own experiences or expectations upon them, not even necessarily feminizing them, although there is that kind of aspect to it.
Right.
But also just expanding upon their experience in a way that hasn't really been facilitated in the text itself, in a way that is often not allowed of males, I find, in texts in general.
Exactly. And that's really kind of what it is you have this character that you are endeared to. And one thing we say a lot about Styles, when we talk about like queer baiting and that kind of thing, and we talk about the queer baiting of bi Styles, having him being that questioning character for all those months and being like, am I attracted to gay guys? And, I'm best friends with the drag queens at the bar. And he's very much a male, but without embodying those alpha male tropes, And so when you have a character like that and you bring them into ABO, a lot of times Styles will end up being the Omega, because he's kind of the talk piece for us as an audience, but then just as the person who has the closest to our experience. And so what I see a lot of girls do is by stripping out the toxicity of the kind of masculine component, they present this male who is kind of defined or biologically determined by this very female casing, saying, let's see what happens here. Because ultimately, this is what being a female is. It's having this identity that is constantly clouded by boobs.
Yeah.
By people kind of having that place where you're always going to kind of be second place. You always kind of have to, sit back and let the guys do their thing. And there's
always that element where you are slightly sexualized. Even if people aren't trying to do it intensely, there's just this aura in society in general that expects you to be taken that way. So
it's the idea, and I mean it's a very real idea, and I understand where it comes from, but it's the idea that guys can walk around shirtless all the time, but a girl can't walk around shirtless
because it'll cause a commotion. So yeah,
it causes a commotion, and it becomes like, oh, how dare you distract me from my daily grind with boobs. And it's like, I've got boobs, you've got boobs. It's like, at this point, we wear the same bra cup. Like, there's guys out there that I've seen that just let it all hang out. And it's perfectly fine, because they don't have, the sexuality for a man comes from a different place. It's less visual, I find, and more visceral. Because I find that a woman can look at a man and really like make him the ideal, regardless of how he looks. Like, I can work with this. Whereas I find when viewing women, it's very visual and it's very, curves and that kind of thing. And so you kind of get into this thing where it's like, I'm happy to have that, but I don't want that to be the only way that you look at me.
Yeah.
And so bringing that into, writing for this ABO, it's, here is the embodiment of kind of me as a woman, but in a casing that you're not used to seeing.
Yeah.
So here's this guy, and a lot of times in ABO fics, you'll see Styles will be like, oh, he's not like ordinary Omegas, which is a whole nother thing. But he's like, oh, he has hairy legs, and oh, he feels bad because he didn't shave, and it's like all these very girl things.
Yeah.
But put on something that's not a girl, how do you react, and why do you react one way to that, and then not to me as a person?
Yeah. I also enjoy when people really break down the examination of the alpha, and that it's not always this stress-free, enjoyable position to occupy within society. And I find that very interesting and very therapeutic to explore that stress and that type of masculinity in that way, which can be explored more in the more world-based fics. Like, it sometimes gets a bit buried when we're dealing with the more smutty, like, he's in heat, I've got to help him through the heat kind of fic. But when you're actually dealing with the world-building aspects, the way that the characters interact can really explore some of those real-world dynamics in an interesting way. And I don't necessarily mind that the women aren't always ever present in the universe, because the issues are still being explored through these characters. So I don't really feel that left out. And there are ABOs that do have women very front and center. They're just not as dominant. But that also happens because of the fandom where ABO happens to be most prominent. It's like Supernatural. And Supernatural almost has no women anyway. So
right. I find that, especially within Teen Wolf, the women will be there, but a lot of times they'll be together. And the female issues, the one kind of good and bad thing about it is, we talked about this with Lydia.
Yeah.
All of the women on Teen Wolf kind of have this, like, oh yeah, I'm dope, and I'm strong, and I kick butt, and blah 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 blah. And Lydia really kind of started as, I have been going through some stuff, but I still have this femininity to me. And I'm put on my face, and I'm going to go out there, and I'm going to meet the world. And then comes season 5, and she's like, I'm a strong woman, and I'm kicking butt. Like, you lose that femininity to it. And I think that's kind of what the response in fic is let's bring back that femininity. We don't want to take away the strength from these women and the specific strength that they have, but we want to add something that's going to be a little softer, but not weak, that difference in there.
How do you feel when people bring up what they feel is the abusive elements of ABO? Because that's another one I hear a lot. Lots of people have issues with the consent element of ABO because of the intrinsic nature of heats and the kind of almost mate or die aspect that some of it has at times.
I like it because I find that it makes for an intriguing narrative. One of the best ABOs that I've ever read is by Discontented Winter, and I cannot remember for the life of me the name of it. But anyone who has read this fic knows, and it will tear out your heart. I'll try to get you a link at some point. But basically, it's one of those slightly dystopian AUs where, it's a ABO society, and Omegas, it's almost kind of like Handmaid's Tale, the Omegas are very, demure, and they're supposed to be, like put down and have, like, of course, Styles comes in as the Omega rights activist, so that kind of thing. Well, they kind of have like a lottery or something where Derek was a beta, but Peter was an alpha. And then so Peter laid claim to Styles, and Styles was like, no, I don't want this life. And and of course Styles was in love with Derek, and Derek is like, I'm going to find a way to fix this, but not before like Peter basically ruins both of their lives, and it just brings that whole kind of thing. I like those fics because I like that people shine that light on them. I feel like there is enough diversity in the fics where you can have those fics exist, and it doesn't define the entire trope. I think what some people get a little bit upset about, because when you're dealing with consent issues, especially, we're dealing with consent issues from a non-ABO world that we're putting onto
it. Yeah.
And so it doesn't quite translate. what they're going to consider a consent issue is not what we will consider a consent issue. And so it's very interesting to see how they kind of deal with that. Another good fic, it was actually just like a sex pollen.
Yeah.
But finally, Derek and Styles were like, you know what? We keep getting into these situations. So let's just make a pact that if one of us ever gets imbibed by sex pollen, the other one will help them take care of it. And that's it. You know, I like you tried to build in that consent. And you'll see that sometimes in ABO where it's like, my heat's coming up. I need someone to get me through it.
Yeah.
My heat partner, yada, yada. But then you'll get those ones, and I don't care. I love them. Where it's like Styles is walking down the street, and he's like, living my beta life, and then all of a sudden it hits him, and he's like, what? Oh my God, I'm in heat. You know, Gary's like, what's happening? I helped you. And so I'm here for those. I feel, again, that there's enough diversity where you can find something that's not going to squick you out.
Yeah.
But there, I mean, I think that that's part of it. I think that when you're dealing with the idea that there is a biological imperative to me, and that we're dealing with sense and with, you know, that kind of pull and that kind of longing, that you're going to run into some messy territory. And that's what I love, when seeing the different ways that people deal with that territory.
I think that's a very good point. Like, firstly, that it is an entirely different universe, so it's not really fair to impose real-world standards, because the whole point is trying to create a different universe in the first place with its own set of rules. But also that there is such a great variety in the fiction. But I also want to add to that I don't think there's anything wrong with, like you said, enjoying even the most, let's say, problematic of fics, where it's just straight up smut, and, oh no, I'm in heat, and like he's right there. And I think that there's room for that escapism and also female fantasy, which I find can sometimes be very demonized online and very much just labeled as, oh, fetishization. You just want to see two men going at it and you don't have any care. But the idea is that because of that, like, you don't have any care for like real world, like men's, like, you know, like gay men's rights and all that stuff. It's like, no, like it's almost, I like to liken it to 50 Shades of Grey. How when it first came out, everybody was quick to point out all the abusive elements, which are definitely there, and that then all of a sudden it became really cool to not like it. And now if people do like it for that kind of escapist, although admittedly very poorly defined BDSM element, they're very much demonized for it. And it's kind of like, well, why can't people have that escapism that they enjoy? Just because you enjoy it and find it kind of kinky or hot or intriguing to read doesn't mean that you aren't aware that it, of course, has problems, and you wouldn't condone anything like it in real life. I feel it's one of those things where people are blurring that divide of what you enjoy in fiction versus what you enjoy and will condone in real life.
Exactly. And that's the idea, is that people will somehow take the enjoyment of that and then foist it onto real life. I know one of my favorite fics, and it's just, and I say this, but I really enjoyed it, but I read it maybe once every 2 years, and I go in it, because it's she, and the author was like, look, I wrote this as a prompt, and you know, I really wanted it. It is problematic. There are things wrong in this fic, but and I think it's even anonymous now. I think she put it on anonymous. So it's like a cultivation, and Styles is like 12 years old, and then he's bought by Derek. And Styles is an Omega. He's bought by Derek, who's an Alpha. And then it's just about their lives and all the really jacked up things in the society. But it's like, I love it. I love this fic. I think when we get into dark fic and we get into dystopian kind of realities, and that kind of thing, they have their place as pure entertainment value.
Yes.
That doesn't mean that I'm going to go on Craigslist and start shopping for 12-year-olds. You know? That's not a thing. You know, it's like, that's not okay. But reading and just experiencing that other world, I don't see a problem with that. And again, I feel like there's enough variety there. If I don't want to see 50 Shades, I never have to see 50
Yeah, exactly.
Ever. I never have to experience that. If I just want to see one clip of Tyler Hoechlin walking into her office, then I can watch that. You know, it's not anything where, you know, just the fact that it exists is hampering me. I got into this when I was in high school. I discovered a little thing called hentai. And I had started with just regular anime and the anime geek for a while, and I was just like a Cowboy Bebop and just all that nonsense. And then I was just like, I think I saw a manip of like Sailor Moon, and I was like, her titties are not that big. You know? And just kind of went down the rabbit hole, and I discovered hentai, and I was like, oh, this is awful. I cannot. But then understanding the cultural element that it has for being this kind of underground taboo expression, this overt sexuality, you know, and it's like I'm one of those people, it's like the dirty trains and the, you know, oh, I raped you and now I'm going to rape your sister and you can't say anything because then you will be shamed. You know? Just like, and I'm here like, what is happening? You know, and so then you used to get like the yaoi, and it's a little bit better, not so crazy. You find those avenues where you're like, okay, I like this artistic format, but I need to find something that's not going to make me crazy. But I know a lot of people that, you know, get involved with hentai. I know there's like millions of subscribers and all this other stuff. That doesn't mean that they are at the zoo looking at squids some sort of way. You know?
No, and it doesn't mean they're going to get on the subway and start trying to grope the ladies on the subway and all of that.
Exactly. And it's like, and you find that like the guys that do usually don't have that in their background. Sometimes it can be that thing where it's like, you know what, this is enough. I don't real world to experience this. It's right here and I'm good. But yeah, I think that I understand the ideas of something being triggering and something, you know, people having that reaction. But I also understand the idea of people using that as a coping mechanism.
Yes.
And that quite a bit where people are like, I needed to write this. I needed to get this out. And here it is, you know, and you're just like, okay, you know. So I feel like when it comes to that, a lot of the personal responsibility is on the reader at that point to know what they can and cannot handle. But I feel like the fact that it exists is important, and, you know, it's out there for a reason, so.
Yeah, I completely agree, because I 100% do understand that some things are triggering for some people, and that's why I'm such a huge advocate of tags and putting the proper tags on things so that everybody can look at just right before they even open it and see if something's going to be potentially problematic for them. But I also feel that the other complete flip side of it, of people who don't have any triggers, who have been fortunate enough to not have anything that really is scarring or problematic for them really happen, have that avenue to explore these darker themes. Because sometimes that is another thing that is just fascinating, because like, I don't understand this. I want to dive in and see what's going on here and try and understand either why people like it or what's going on. And so I think it's good to have it accessible from that point as well. I do feel that there is a bit of a hyper reaction right now because of call out culture and all kinds of things, of being very down on something right away for potentially causing all of these problems. And I feel that a lot of times that doesn't give the individual room for their own critical thought, which is something I'm not a fan of.
Another big part of it is, I'm trying to think of the best way to kind of word this. You have, one other thing that a lot of people, they do and they don't understand, is you're going to have a period, everybody kind of ingest things differently.
Yes.
And their journey is going to be different. So as soon as I publish something, that's when the first reader who clicks on it, that's when their journey starts to the end of the fic. The issue is this story has been up for 3 years.
Yes.
So then when this person comes in at 3 years later, this is when it starts, and then this is kind of how it goes. By the time this person at 3 years comes in, this person at 1 year is like, I'm on board. I understand the relationships. I know what's going on. I know what's happening. It's all good. Mm-hmm. This person is like, what is happening? What is going on? Where am I? And so I feel like when we get into these situations of, oh, everybody should be on the same page, everyone's going to be on the same page. You're going to have to expect those reactions from the people who are like, I'm good, I'm with you, and the people like, what has happened? And so I had a fic that I wrote years ago. And it was funny because this girl had just started reading it and just started commenting on it.
Yeah.
And she was like, I really wish that you would tag all of Derek's relationships because I feel like he would, oh gosh, it was something about like, I feel like this relationship is actually going to be bigger than like the Steric relationship. And, you know, I'm like, bad and I need the Steric relationship to be bigger. And I was like, what is she talking about? It's like the Steric relationship is like the entire point of this thing.
Yeah.
She like had commented on chapter 3, you know, but that was like part of her journey. So it was like, okay, you know, I understand what you're saying. Keep going. You're going to be okay, you know. And don't worry, this is what this means. And, you know, I answered her questions and she was like, oh, thank you very much for answering questions, you know. And so then at the end of the fic, she left a comment. She's like, loved it. Yeah. And I was just like, okay. But if I had gone in with like, oh no, you know, this is ABO and I tagged it the way I'm going to tag it.
Yeah, exactly.
How it's done and then it just, it stops becoming a conversation and it starts becoming a lecture. And that.
And no one responds well to that.
Exactly. It's such a big part of the way that we kind of interact with each other. And so I'm like, yeah, you have to keep those things in mind that we're not, the internet isn't a homogenous group of people.
Exactly.
And when we talk about, you know, we joke about like Tumblr SJWs and that kind of thing, but it's like, you have science Tumblrs and you have the, you know, pro Tumblrs, you have all these different things. It created a people and everybody is going to react to something different, you know.
No, 100%. And that's the thing too, is that when people are entering fandom or people outside of it are analyzing it, they tend to look at it as a monolith. And that can be where a lot of the confusion comes in, because then a lot of people who do dive in are expecting it to be that kind of like, okay, everybody in fandom thinks this and we're going to go for it like that. And then when they encounter it, realize like, oh, it's actually much more multifaceted. It can be a bit overwhelming, because I've seen that when people are just entering and they're like, I've never heard of this, I've never heard of that, I've never heard of any of these things, like how do you navigate it? And so I feel like that's going to be a very interesting shift that's going to happen in fandom as more and more people join in and it becomes bigger and bigger and more mainstream. So I'm very curious as to how that's going to be navigated, because like we were talking about last time with Steric, just how they deal with the communication with all of the fans and the creators, because people are getting more and more bold with like talking about certain elements of fandom. And so these things will come up, and people forget in fandom also, because as you said, when you get further along your journey, it gets more and more normalized for you. Like, yeah, there's ABO and it happens and that's totally cool. But then if you bring it out into like, let's say a con setting, you're like, so these ABO fics that I wrote.
Like, I've had that experience. And in fact, one of my very first Teen Wolf convention experiences was, you're a Scott fan. That's really cool. How do you feel about Steric? And then be like, yeah. Be like, oh, what? You know, like, what's going on? And, you know, just being completely naive and just not knowing, like, any of that background. And so it's like you have to get to the point where you know it's not universal. But then specifically that a lot of times we speak in hyperboles.
Yes.
And so it's very easy to be like, all XYZ does ABC, you know, and it's like, well, of course not all XYZ. Yeah. Probably not even half of XYZ even knows what ABC is. So it's like, that's not going to be a part of the story. I don't begrudge anyone their first reaction.
Yeah, of course.
A first impression, you know, whether, you only get one chance at a first impression, you get as many chances as you want. The issue where I come in is the inability to course correct. and to kind of understand, like, maybe there is a different perspective on this that I'm not seeing. Help me understand this perspective, and then, I can kind of decide where I want to go from there. I feel like people want everything all at once, but then when they get it, they're like,
it's too much.
Yeah, exactly. It's good time.
And that's the thing, because I feel that, especially in fandoms where ABO is very large, some fans do feel a bit of pressure that they have to like it because it's so popular. And like, well, everybody seems to like it and I don't like it. Is there something wrong with me? And the thing is that you don't have to. If it's not your cup of tea, it's not your cup of tea, and that's absolutely fine. There is plenty of other stuff out there for you. Not everybody has to be in to the same thing. And if you explore it and you find it too problematic, too smutty, too whatever, that's absolutely fine too.
Yeah, I do find, and it's very interesting. I understand the need to kind of get what everybody gets, and like the popularity of the thing. What I find it kind of translates itself to, though, and what I've kind of noticed is I have an issue with a very problematic element of this thing.
Yes.
But everybody seems to like this thing that I have a strong kind of almost moral opposition to. So they kind of, it ends up being kind of a backhanded compliment, like a compliment kind of thing where you're like, oh, I don't understand why everybody likes, lack of consent. It's basically rape.
Yeah.
You're just like, oh, wait, hold on. Let's back this up. And so that's why I was like, we just got to get to that culture of minding your own business. When it comes down to it, like, what is actually going to affect me as a person? When I talked about hyperbole, you see, especially when we talk about lack of consent in ABO, I was like, consent in ABO is a very specific thing, because when we talk about rape in ABO, that is a different beast. When we talk about alphas who are imposing themselves over omegas, and be it sexually, emotionally, physically, etc., that is a very real response to real life kind of triggers. That's a different consent story than I'm in heat and I need someone to take now,
And they're treated very differently within fandom. They are, like, the narratives and the way they're handled are very different. And those more, like, straight up, like, traditional abusive stories are, like, they have a negative slant. It's not hot. It's not like, oh, wow, look at that. He owns him. No, it's like, oh, he's abusing his power, and that's not good.
Exactly. And I feel like at a very top level, those two get kind of intermeshed with each other. And what happens is once you start disseminating, that's when they kind of break apart. But when people see that initially, they think, oh, I don't like ABO because of lack of consent. And they're talking about rape, they're talking about sexual assault. And it's like, no, that's the entire point, is we're dealing with sexual assault through the use of ABO. But when we're talking about, just that biological imperative, that pull towards one another, that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about like an abusive element to that.
No, and it's like the reason it's so much stronger is because of the universe, well, the biology and the pheromones and the entire societal structure. And that's why it looks so completely different from a standard non-ABO fic.
Exactly.
The other thing, too, with consent in fics in general, not just ABO, but all of them, is that the reason so many people can explore dubcom rape or just things that kind of skirt those sides is because with fiction, you have that privilege of you can show the person's thought process. You can show both people's thought process. And so it's very different. So you can show all these different levels and layers to the consent that you wouldn't have in a real world situation, because you can't read people's minds in the real world situation. But in fiction, you can present all of what you're working with in the fic. So it makes it a very different environment.
I read this Black Sails AU, and it was the Black Sails Teen Wolf crossover. It was a hot mess. It was fantastic. But Derek was a pirate captain, of course, and I'm so sorry to your viewers. It was like I'm talking about is Derek. Honestly, that's all I know. But very focused like that, but it all applies. But and then Styles was, of course, the Omega aristocratic cabin boy, and he was going off to marry for his family, and he was going to meet this, blah blah blah. And so they started in with this whole. Derek was like, "Oh, that's my mate." Consent is consent, and throughout the whole thing, it was like. He was basically like forcing himself on Styles, and he was just like, I can smell, our biologies match, I can smell you want this. And Styles was like, I might want it, but I don't want it like this. I want it on my own terms, and kind of explain that. And I know while I was reading the fic, I was like, this is super rapey. I was like, I'm enjoying the story, but oh my God, and you can kind of chalk it up to, okay, well, maybe this is a sign of the times, and this is kind of how they were treated back then. But then I'm like, where is that resolve to be like, hey, let's acknowledge that this is a thing? And in fiction, and because it's an amateur work, you aren't necessarily guaranteed that resolve. And so that's where you kind of come in as a reader, where you're like, you know what, I'm going to think about this, and I'm going to challenge kind of what my views are on it and where I think that this person was coming from. I don't think that the writer was like, oh, rape is fun and sexy, but I also think that the writer was like, at the end, he was just like, I'm tired. I've written 125,000 words. Wrap it up, that kind of thing. And so it ended pretty quickly, and I was left at the end of it, and I was like, I can kind of make a decision. I can either be left unsatisfied by this and say, this didn't do what I wanted to do, or as an interactive kind of fandom member, I can kind of fill in those gaps and be like, you know what, I think Styles would have done this, and I think that this person would have interacted this way, and just kind of make it what I want it to be, which is what the joy and the beauty of fandom is. I've seen so many cases where a story will end and someone will be like, oh my God, I'm so inspired by this. I love it. Do you mind if I keep writing in this verse? And the author will be like, yeah, go ahead, go for it. And then you read their thing, you're like, oh my God, this is amazing. I like that kind of group share, but I like it. It doesn't have to be closed.
Yeah.
And if we get to that point where we realize that it's not fan fiction is not a finite statement.
Yes.
It's really kind of just like an explosion of creativity at that point that you can kind of take and, pick and choose what parts you like, what parts you identify with. And if you want to expand on them later, you have that ability.
No, exactly. And that's how you get these wonderful expanded worlds, even like ABO, because ABO started off very small, just a prompt, and then, it exploded and people are like, I like this. And they built more and more and more on it because, like you said, early ABO didn't look like ABO looks now. So...
Right. It's so interesting because ABO, especially I read a John Locke ABO, and I think I have read a couple of Marvel ones where you're just like, this is so different, but it's still very much ABO. You understand it's such a rich, ABO is like a neighborhood.
Yeah.
And each story is like a little house on the block, and they're all, you have some that are going to be like the row houses and everything is the same. And then you have some where you have that quirky house from 1800, like I'm not rebuilding, and that's how it's going to be. I really like, kind of taking a stroll in that neighborhood and seeing all the different elements and the different angles that you can have for it. We were talking about, like, you can have ABO, and you'll see sometimes in the tags of the notes, we're like, ABO, no impreg.
Yeah.
Fine, I guess. He, but not ABO, or impreg, but not ABO. Just on and on. It's like, okay, this is I love the explosion of it and the way that it's kind of charted off into different territories.
And that is the interesting thing about it, because each fandom will tailor it to suit its universe. Because for some fandoms, the supernatural aspects don't really play that well, and so they just eliminate them entirely. For others, they add in all of those extra, like, so I've seen a lot in the other fandoms, like Marvel and Sherlock. They like to add in the BDSM element a lot.
Yeah.
Like, that's very interesting to me. Like, they almost equate heat and subdrops and all kinds of different things together, and it's fascinating to see all these things get married. But then that's also probably why some people are so confused, because it gets very complicated to try and unravel how all of these things ended up coming together.
That's actually a really good example. When I heard about BDSM and sadomasochism, immediately I'm like, whips and leather. That's all I kind of thought about it. That's all I kind of knew about it.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't until fan fiction, where there was one, it's called The Healing Touch. No, I can never be someone but your friend. It's by Devil's Cut, who's an amazing author. But basically it's post Nagitsune. And Styles just goes over to Derek's and he's like, I'm stressed out and I need to kind of get into that subspace. And I remember reading it and being like, I have no idea what any of this is talking about. And there was some bondage, but it was bondage as like an emotional self.
Yes.
Versus, this kind of kinky thing. And so I was just like, and it's very illuminating when you kind of get out of the yes sir, no sir element of it.
Yes.
And understanding why that yes sir, no sir exists, what it's trying to accomplish when we talk about subdrops and aftercare and hurt and that kind of thing. It's like, it's something I never would have even thought to consider. Mm-hmm. But I remember my very first experience, and this is probably true, sadly, for a lot of people, with BDSM was, do you remember this movie where this guy, it had Rosie O'Donnell and an Aykroyd? Is that a thing? Where they went on like a cruise and they dressed up as BDSM people? I remember as Rosie was in this like leather teddy. But the whole conceit was this kid, someone was trying to kill this guy. And when the guy was a kid, he had a very like buxom kind of French nanny. And she's like, you are being very bad. And she like put him over her knee, like spanking him. So then he grew up really into BDSM because that's what it was. And so he went on some cruise, but someone was trying to kill him, and Rosie O'Donnell was a cop, and she was trying to be undercover. And I really think it was Rosie O'Donnell. I gotta find this movie now. I'm obsessed. But that was like my first foray into like understanding at all what BDSM was. And so then like when 50 Shades comes out, you're just like, more of the same, whatever. But then you start reading the fic, and you're like, wait a minute. Oh.
I honestly thought you were going to say Secretary, the one with James Spader and Maggie Gyllenhaal. That was my first encounter with it, where I was just like, this is very interesting, because it's very much like she puts herself into that submissive position, but it's her who chooses to do it. Yeah. So that's what I found so fascinating. And after that, I got into, I was kind of just interested in finding more out about it. And so I did some research and I read some fics and stuff. So by the time 50 Shades came out, I was already like, this isn't right. Like, what?
That is so interesting that you said that. I completely forgot about Secretary. But, and again, so this kind of links back to the ABO thing. Mm-hmm. I'm like, how do I frame this? We talk about my issue. Okay. So let's do this. We talk about the idea of a movement being a gateway kind of movement. Mm-hmm. When we look at something like Queer as Folk, a lot of people looking back, they're like, it's exploitation and blah, blah, blah. And it was just kind of over-sexualizing gay men and da-da-da-da-da. But I said, one thing you have to remember is Queer as Folk was reaction to the late 80s, early 90s string of just overwrought AIDS dramas, you know, like everybody was dying in, and the gay men had to be the demure kind of like very long suffering kind of, oh, I'm gay and why, and you know, that kind of thing. And so you started seeing real, you know, gay people who were like, that's not my story, and now I have to go to work, and I have to interact with my friends, and I have to do all this other stuff with them thinking that that's my story. And every time I cough, they're like, are you okay? You know? And so people are like, let's put out more of a picture of what we're really like. And so then you kind of got the Queer as Folk era, where it was like, oh, you know, we're wild and we're crazy and we're having fun and that kind of thing. And so it's like, oh, you have these two extremes. So then you kind of get into the sassy sidekick. I'm the one and, you know, Will and Grace and Jack and Karen, you know, and that kind of thing. And then we're into this thing where it's like, you know, gay people are just like everybody else and they're just boring as you and I, you know, we're just like, oh. And so now we're kind of sliding into the era where people are starting to say, hey, you know, we're gay, but that's just like a part of us. It's not
the whole thing.
Exactly. Here's all this other stuff that we do as not just as gay people, but as people. You get to that point, but you don't really get to that point without getting through those other kind of obstacles. So when we talk about the idea of the female view, and with Teen Wolf having these strong female characters, one of the very first, we're doing this rewatch, one of the very first things Allison says is, she's like, oh, I'm not like other girls. And she's like, what? And she's like, I'm not a girly girl. And I don't cry. And we're just like, but at the time, that was a statement. That was a very real thing of like, yeah, I'm not like the other girls, because they were putting those other girls on this pedestal as the definition of femininity. And so you had someone that was saying, I'm still a girl, but I'm not like them. The problem is it kind of got misconstrued into saying, well, there's a problem with these girls. When it's like, no, there's not a problem with these girls. There's a problem with the idea that
there's only one type of girl. But...
There's only one type. Exactly. And so then we go, one of the faults I kind of find with Teen Wolf is you had that, you know, oh, all these girls have got to kick butt. And you have the introduction of a girl where they immediately wanted to introduce her as not like other girls. And, but it was just too far to the left. It wasn't it was like, I'm not like other girls. I'm a tomboy and I don't, you know, and I'm brash and And it's like, but we're at the point where we're like, hey, let's celebrate femininity. Why is that a bad thing? So, you've seen that shift within ABO Fix, where Styles originally starts as, I'm a mega rights activist and I'm not like other Omegas and I don't shave and, you know, my hair is short and and then he's kind of sliding into, hey, I'm an Omega and I accept this and I love it and bring on the heat, baby. You know, I got a list of alphas out the door. I'll do what I want. And having that expression being like, I'm finally finding my strength within my representation, my presentation. Now, where you kind of, not necessarily run into trouble, but where, again, the differences in people's journeys. While those fics exist that celebrate the Omega and celebrate the humanity, you still have the fics that exist that are like, Omegas are scum and I'm fighting against that, or, you know, that kind of thing. And what it ends up reading into is really seeing the different ways that women are kind of treated through these lenses, and you have to be able to kind of timeline it out. And okay, yeah, it makes sense. I understand where she was coming from when she wrote this. It might not hold up now, but that's okay. It makes sense why it was there.
And that's why context is so, so important, because I see this happen in fandom all the time. Somebody will take something from a very specific moment and then use it as either like, you see why this is terrible or you see why this is great. And you're like, but this is just one isolated moment in time, and it's not really fair to just isolate it like that, because then you can't examine all of the elements that led up to it and where it is and what it led up to too. Like, you can't just look at that one tiny period of history where we, like that year we made all those female-led action movies where it's like, she can kick all the butt, like all the men, and be like, you see, that's every woman ever. And it's like, no, that was that was one little bit of time. But the thing is, I find that people do have a bit of that either short attention span, or if you're not as into something, you don't examine it the same way. So it's very easy to forget that most people either don't have time or aren't inclined. Like, I was out for dinner the other day with some friends, and this one girl was like, I finally had time to watch a new movie, and I didn't fall asleep. And I was like, oh, great, what'd you watch? She was like, I saw Thor. And I was like, oh my God. And I was like, new?
My favorite is when I had a friend that actually saw the newer Thor, because it's so funny, you said that, and I was like, if it hadn't been, I wouldn't have even known that there was a new one. Someone was talking about Tessa Thompson.
Yeah.
And like in the Thor movie. And I was like, Tessa Thompson isn't a Thor movie. And they're like, oh no, it's the new one. But that had been their first movie that they had seen in forever. So I was like, you start with the Thor? You start with the third Thor in this Marvel? And Black Panther, you know, is so good.
Yeah,
but as huge as Black Panther has become, they you have a lot of people where that's their first induction into a Marvel superhero movie.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, how?
How did you get here?
And then I was actually in the theater, because I've seen it like 3 or 4 times in the theater so far. And I always stay till like the end credits. Yeah. You know how Marvel does, where they're like, oh, here's another one. And so I was after the last scene, and the girl kept trying to make her dad. She was like, Dad, wait, there's another scene. He was like, what? He's like, let's go home. What are you doing? You know? And so they did the scene, and then Bucky, you know, does that whole thing. And she's like, oh my God, Bucky! And he's like, what? Who's that guy? Like, we stayed for this? What are you talking about? She's like, he's going to be in Infinity War. He's going to... What? Yeah. It was like, they didn't care. And I was just like, you know what? I envy that person. I would love to have that naivety where I'm just like, this is a fun little movie.
Yeah. No, I'm like, I know too much. Like, sometimes when I'm just like, I know too much, I wish I didn't know as much as I knew. Like, when I'm doing all the Voltron stuff right now, and I was so hopeful. Like, my first video was so hopeful. I was like, it's calmed down. Klance has calmed down. And then literally the next day, there was a huge Klance outbreak. I was like, no, guys, Covet's rooting for you.
I know. I was rooting for you. Oh, goodness. That is fantastic.
They can't.
That's why I really love doing this rewatch, because there's so many things where it's like, we really gave this show a lot of benefit of doubt in the beginning. Yeah. And you see these people who will make these complaints. And a lot of part of the rewatch is, you know, these complaints that we're still making all these years later, do they hold up? Is this something to really complain about? And then you look back and you're like, oh my God, they are. Like, it really was like that.
I see the Voltron fandom setting itself up for a lot of those moments. Like, I did the couple, and I have a couple more coming, videos, and one of the things that I saw instantly was people were like, Klance will happen because season 6 is coming out in June, and that is Pride Month. And I was like, oh God, if something does not happen in Pride Month, I'm not ready for what's going to happen in this fandom. I'm not ready.
It's so funny, especially as someone where you're like, I'm trying to warn you. I'm trying to warn you, don't do it.
Yeah, you're just like, don't, guys, I know you're excited, don't get this attached, because your hearts, like, maybe it will happen, but there's also a really strong chance that it won't, because I was actually doing a really intense rewatch leading up to it, because somebody was talking about Jeremy Shada and how he's dropped all of these spoilers because he can't keep his mouth shut at a con, and about how it's going to be a slow burn for Lance. And I went back and I rewatched, and I was like, oh God, it's Allura. I was looking at all of the scenes, and I was like, oh God, it's Allura, isn't it? People are going to die.
It's so... I understand where the frustration comes from. And I find that what bothers me is when you have kind of, it's okay. It's like, oh. I understand having an attachment to the canon.
Yes.
But when your investment in the canon supersedes the investment of the creators, I find you kind of run into issues. We're dealing with we're dealing with this whole thing with cause and effect in our fandom currently.
Yes.
Where a lot of people will make a statement where they will make the effect seem as though it's the cause.
Yes.
So there was this complaint that, Steric fandom got too big, and then people stopped watching the show. And people stopped being interested in the show because they were only invested in Steric. And it's like, one thing that you have to kind of think about is that if you have a show that is very plot heavy and plot driven, and you change that show to become character driven, then you're changing the expectations of your audience. One thing that I've seen within Teen Wolf, and then I'll contrast that in a second, but one thing I've seen with Teen Wolf is a lot of times they have actors that they like, so they will form the plot around actors, regardless of if it really makes sense or not. So you have an attachment to these characters, and the plot kind of goes by the wayside. And so as a fandom, as people, when you get to the point where your plot starts becoming a little convoluted or non-existent, or it has too many holes in it, then people will attach themselves to the characters. And so that's why we run into the characters with these huge amounts of ships, and every character that comes on gets shipped with someone immediately, because the show at that point has become character driven. You're not as invested in the plot. And while on a very supernatural level, dealing with things like the Anukate and the Benefactor and the I always call them Rough Riders, the Ghost Riders, and that kind of thing. All of that can be very interesting, but the canon isn't giving it the attention that it really deserves. What they're giving the attention to is, Styles is about to buy a new car, and, Scott has a girlfriend and wants to go to prom. You can't blame the focus being put on characters, because you can't say that is destroying the plot, when really it's an effect of the plot kind of disintegrating.
Like that. Definitely, you saw that shift too in Voltron when DreamWorks decided that they wanted to alter the pacing because they were worried about losing that fan engagement. So instead of airing the seasons as 13 episode blocks like they originally intended, they broke them up into 6 and 7 episode blocks. And so now you have a new season every 3 months. So everybody's always super pumped and super hyped. But because of that, the pacing is very much just like, oh, this happened, and this happened, and this happened, and where'd that character go? And so it's very... Like, for example, you have Pidge, who had that arc where I've got to find my brother, and they mentioned it early on, like, I got to find my brother Rizzy. Then 2 seasons later, oh yeah, I guess I have to find my brother. And then finally, this season, it's, I found my brother. And I'm like, oh my God. Like, the pacing was just all over the place. But because of that, you do have fandom struggling to fill in all of these gaps. And
he find his brother and what was happening in the background, and
and that happens with Clance too, because people are so convinced, like, no, like, all these things aren't being addressed on screen. Like, what did Lance think about Keith being half Galra? We never saw that, so I want to see that inside of a fanfic. And so you have this really intense invested fandom, then you have this show that's already probably been plotted through to the end.
Exactly.
And
so that's kind of the issue. So then you have that, and then so something happens in the new season that might contradict the fan theory. So then from there, the fan theory evolves. It evolves around it. It says, okay, we went left here. What we should have done was gone right. And so now we're going right, and now we're branching off over here. Well, the left still exist, and those branches still exist, But I find people, they get... There's this weird kind of pettiness, for lack of a better way to put it, between the creators, because they're like, I can't control the timing. I can't control the way that these episodes are released.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so much else to kind of take other people's attention. So you do end up writing with, I have to write hard and I have to write fast.
Yeah.
And I have to do it now. And I wish that more creators would kind of get on board with, instead of trying to have this finite plot, have it where it's a little more open-ended, especially when you know that your fandom is going to be as rabid and as robust as something like Voltron is, where it's like, I'm going to give you guys a little bit of room for growth. Because between, would you say his name was Pim?
A Pidge.
A Pidge.
Yeah.
Between Pidge being like, hey, my brother is missing.
To, hey, my brother.
I found my brother. There's a whole bunch of stories that you as a creator don't have the time to tell.
Mm-hmm.
Don't be upset when your fandom decides to tell that story. That's not, I don't find that to be a slight. And I think sometimes you still get creators that see that as a slight.
It's like they did an interview recently, which was part of what got the Clans fandom up in arms again, where Lauren Montgomery, she said that she was like, I'm just going to invite all the hate. She's like, I didn't see it coming. She flat said, she's like, I did not see it coming. It came out of nowhere for me. I was blindsided. I didn't expect these two specific characters to become that popular and be shipped. And then where they got into trouble was Joaquin Dos Santos responded with, he thought it was the forbidden fruit aspect, which I got. What he was trying to say was that he thought it was because it was kind of hidden and in the shadows and subtextual, and that's why people really gravitated towards it versus a ship that's out there on your plate. But people took it as this kind of homophobic statement.
Ooh, right.
Of him saying like, oh, you're saying that queer ships can't happen. And I was like, no, that's not what he was saying. He was trying to say that fandom in general grows because things are in the shadows and that's what fans gravitate towards. And so I was just like, oh, this is why creators don't say things.
Or they don't say the right things. And I still don't understand. We talk about this constantly. Mm-hmm. Every fandom, all the time. Hey, fandom, we love what you're doing.
Yes.
It's amazing. Keep doing it more. It may not necessarily end up on the show in the way that
we love it.
But we love it. Keep doing it. Bringing on. In the meantime, please also enjoy what we're bringing you. Mm-hmm. We love that you're enjoying it so much. We love that it inspires so much. But, keep watching. I can't make any promises, but I can't make any detractions. It may not end up on the show in the way that you're imagining because we have our own group of writers.
Exactly.
Ideas, but we really hope that you love what we're going to bring. The end.
Yeah.
There's this weird, and it is a bait. It's a bait. I mean, there's no other way around it of saying, well, just wait and see. You never know. And it's like, no, don't do that because
it doesn't work anymore. It doesn't work anymore because I get the sentiment. The idea is, oh, we're keeping all our avenues open. But it doesn't work anymore because people take it as a promise. They take it as you saying like, oh, you're actually right and it's really happening. They don't take it as maybe meaning no. They take it as maybe meaning yes.
Yes, so. Exactly. Because you get to that point where so many of the people who are interacting online and in fandom really do come from that section of society that's always just kind of been pushed off. That kind of disenfranchised, people don't listen to me anyway. So you automatically give them an in of saying, hey, internet people, hey, Twitter users, I'm listening to you. Mm-hmm. And then they're like, oh, well, if you're listening, let me tell you this. And I think that they've gotten, I think that kind of took them aback a little bit because they didn't understand like that existed. Mm-hmm. And end up with issues with Supergirl, the Supergirl cast to STCC with the whole like Supercore thing. Mm-hmm. And I don't know much about Supercore, but if people want to ship Supercore, let them ship Supercore.
Go for it, yeah.
Of like it's never gonna happen. And it's like, why? Why do you need to be that pressed? Because obviously it's important to somebody.
Yeah, like Supercore is so huge. And while I'm like, it's fine to find a way to say that it's not going to happen because that is better than letting people run rampant and expecting that it's going to happen when it's not. But at the same time, don't just shut people down. Like,
exactly. I felt that was just so it seemed like a reaction. I'm like, but what are you reacting to? There's no one that, like, if you have, they have that quote, something about you can howl at the moon all you want, but when the moon howls back, there's a problem. And that's why I feel like people on the internet being like, I'll kill you if you don't do Supergirl. You don't listen to those people. That's why I don't look at my timeline. I stay in my notifications. And you're just like, oh, well, thanks for watching. You know?
No, the timeline's too stressful. Like, I know, like, I feel like they're frustrated on Supergirl because they really want Caramel, and that's their thing, and they're super proud of Caramel, and they're like, we did it. And I'm like, look, people aren't driving with Caramel. It's not Kara's fault. It's not Mon-El's fault. People just aren't liking it. And if people aren't liking it, I agree with you. Sometimes you got to do a little bit of a course correct. And Mon-El can still be there, but maybe we need to either change how that arc is written because people aren't driving with it, or maybe we just need to cancel it and do something else altogether.
We talked about this with, I talk about this a lot with Lost.
Mm-hmm.
And because I think that Damon Lindelof actually said this. He was like, you know, you can have this extreme vision, but the second it gets sold and you go to pilot and you start picking up seasons and that kind of thing, it stops becoming yours. He said the only way you're going to survive is if you can divorce yourself from the story. Mm-hmm. And he said, because then you end up just being bitter and petty because you always have to answer to somebody. This story is yours as long as you hold on to it. The second you give it to someone else, it stops becoming yours. And he said, and that's not to be negative. That's not necessarily to have a negative connotation. It's a way of setting your expectations, because either you're going to be answering to the sponsors, mm-hmm. you're going to be answering to the network, you're going to be answering to your fandom, to the actors, to the crew. You know, you have to provide explanation. They one of their famous examples, season 2, they brought on Nikki and Paolo. Mm-hmm. People hated them. And it was a way of trying to expand the characters. I've been listening to a lot of audio drama podcasts lately. And there's one called We're Alive, and it's a zombie apocalypse. Mm-hmm. And start with this core group of characters, and you care about those characters, but they have done a fantastic job in bringing in other characters that you also care about, so that this core cast can take a break when needed, and we can focus on these secondary characters, and nobody is so upset. You know, it's like, we want to get back to primary characters. Don't get it twisted. But we don't mind being here. Well, they introduced Nikki and Paolo. People were just like, no, absolutely. Where's Jack? Where's Kate? Where's, Locke? all that stuff. And so they killed them off. He was like, you know what? Y'all don't like them? We're good. And killed them off dirty, too. It was something terrible. And I remember thinking that was such a big statement, because it wasn't fan service per se, but course correction. It was understanding I don't necessarily need these two to inform my plot. Mm-hmm. They don't have any big, huge reveal that I need the audience to stick through to the end. They're disposable. I can dispose of them. I'm not hurt personally by people not liking Nikki and Paolo. When we deal with things like Stelia and like Mon-El, and I hear these comparisons all the time, which cracks me up. You deal with this person that was brought on and then put with the most popular character, kind of at the expense of another character. So I know Cara James was a huge thing when they were on TV. And then all of a sudden it was like, we're just friends. And then
forget Jimmy. We don't need Jimmy anymore.
Right, exactly. And so, but a lot of the Cara Jimmy shippers were like, excuse you? Like, what's going on? And then not necessarily, like, Styles is just always kind of his own character, but Styles' character had always kind of been weighted in not having a girlfriend. In fact, there was an interview like years ago, and there were like 3 things that Styles would never do. And he was like, be a werewolf, have a girlfriend, or and there was something else, but they figured he was always just kind of that character. And you bring in, you know, Malia, who is just this very oddly defined character from the very beginning. And then they just kind of stick them together because they're like, oh, well, we need you to like Malia for XYZ reason. So you have, you know, you get to the point where we talk about course correction. Teen Wolf just kind of went off the rails. And after like season 5 broke them up, and really season 6 really acted like they had never been together and like completely erased them in like the most pettiest way they could find. And it was, I remember watching and I was like, I'm not mad about this because I hate it. Like, I'm happy that they're doing this, but also I feel some sort of way like this is really messed up. Like, and then ended up putting her with Scott, who was, you know, the alpha, like the Teen Wolf, and it was just like, whose idea was that? This is terrible course correction. And I don't know what's happening with, I know they really tried to push Mon-El. Is Mon-El still a thing?
He's still a thing. He's still there. Like, for me, like, my ship will never happen, which is her and Brainiac 5 from the future. But I will live. But it's just, that was a very interesting case because with superhero stuff, you also have that attempt where they try and build that horizontal tie-in. And so they were like, Mon-El's popular in the comics. People like Mon-El. This would be really great. Let's bring on some Mon-El. And then it was like, And also, it was like, it's this very interesting thing where Supergirl's very resistant to having a too prominent male presence because it has defined itself as such a feminist female show. Right. And when they did bring on Superman, when Hecklin was there and he was Superman, he took the focus. And people were like, oh, that's so sexist. I'm like, no, it's because Superman's a more popular character. And so if you put him there, it's like, oh my gosh, Superman, what's he doing? And so they instantly saw that people were like, I want a Superman spinoff, more Superman. So they're like, okay, we can't do that again. We don't want that to happen. So we need, but they also were like, well, we also want a stronger male presence that isn't Jimmy, that isn't her other friend. I don't know why they shafted Jimmy like that. I'm still so confused as to why Jimmy just got thrown to the side like that. I'm not okay.
Wasn't Jimmy a villain for like a hot second?
And then he got powers, he got a costume, and it was just, I don't know what they were doing with that, and I don't understand why they threw all of that triangle and everything just out the window.
He would have been the perfect kind of thing because he's a very strong character in and of himself, but then also extremely supportive of Kara. Mm-hmm. And I feel like Mon-El kind of came in with a, not necessarily I'm going to put you in your place, but I'm going to kind of knock you off this pedestal a little bit.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I understand where they were coming from with that, but with a show that's kind of built on a feminist slant,
it doesn't play well.
A character come in and do that. It doesn't read the same.
Yeah.
It's not a universal read. And so I do wonder what on earth happened. But we talked a lot when they had announced that they were even bringing on Superman and that it was going to be Hecklin.
Yeah.
I said, I know they're going to be aching for a spinoff. And I said, and they absolutely cannot, because if we have a Superman spinoff, Supergirl is dead.
Yeah, I will watch Superman.
Exactly. And there are some kind of sexist implications to that, but a lot of it also has to do with just the fact it's Superman. Yeah,
it's Superman. And the thing is, it's hard because what I like about Supergirl is that it is establishing her as her own character in her own universe and getting her to a point where maybe there could be a day where it might be a decision where I'm like, I don't know, maybe I'll stick with Supergirl. But right now, when I have all of those years of history and all of that attachment, it's like,
yes.
And because also he doesn't just come by himself. He comes with Lex. He comes with the Justice League. He comes with all of this other stuff. And so it's like, don't do that. Let her do her thing. And he can be in the background like he was in the first season with his cape and his boots. Right. Like, that's fine. We know he exists. And that's all I need, really.
Honestly, yeah. That's really what they need to do. Because even with Kara's getting this is one of the times when being beholden to the comics kind of is that a thing, because, you know, back then, a woman deciding to be a journalist, oh my, she's not at home in her heels cleaning the kitchen, you know, like, what are you talking about? That was like the height of like female expression in the workplace. And now she's like, I'm going to be a journalist. And we're like, girl, go get a job. What are you doing?
I know, like, I'm a personal assistant to the world's worst boss who I really should file a complaint with HR against.
Exactly. Like, girl power. And it's like, ooh, no. Like,
she doesn't even say your name right. Like, no.
I love the vlog card. But Calista was like, look, you give me for a little bit and I'll just be up there.
Yeah. You get one season. I've got to make sure that Harrison Ford doesn't kill himself in a plane crash.
I mean, I used to work in a hotel, and he would fly into one of the local airports that he'd stay with us all the time. And each time I was just like, sir, don't you go take a nap? Oh, what's going on? I love it. But yes, I think the landscape of fandom is such that it's so open and you have so many different facets of it that it gets easier and easier to find kind of your niche in it. But I think one thing that is key to enjoying it is really being able to kind of understand what your limitations are.
Yes.
What you like, and being able to say, you know what, I like this element of this thing. It doesn't mean I need to dismiss the rest of this thing. It doesn't mean I'm condoning the rest of this thing. It just means I like this one element and I'm going to live in this element. I'm going to love it. You know, I find when you get into some of the more niche, the more niche ships, the rare pairs, that kind of stuff, a lot of them are struggling for works. You know, they're like, just give me what I want. And that's where you kind of run into, there might be, Theum is like a ship that's starting to come up. And I just kind of side-eye Theum, like, oh, whatever. Because I didn't watch 680, really. I think we watched maybe 3 or 4 episodes of season 6, and one of those was the finale. So it's just like, I'm good. But for the people that did watch it, Theum kind of took off, which is Theo. And
and Theum,
And you find that it runs kind of 2 ways. It's either kind of dark fic, where, you know, Theo is the evil villain and he's like taking advantage of Liam, and Liam is like, I'm baby alpha, and da-da-da-da. And then, or it kind of gets a little wooby, where it's very kind of domesticated, and Theo's a good guy now and he loves Liam. And so they're just struggling for, like, we want some diversity in these fics, and we want to be able to, you know, have the tropes that we want, but maybe the creator base isn't as big. And so, like,
it's interesting too, because we're seeing that a bit with some of the smaller pairings in Voltron as well, especially if it involves either member of clans. Like Shance is starting to come up post season 5, but what you'll see is that they almost have this reflexive defensive bitterness because they're so afraid of being either oppressed by clans or they're angry about what they've seen in the past, and so they come up punching and angry before.
Like, you're expending a lot of energy being angry, you know, like, take that energy and create something fun
and just make Shance. But there's very much this, we're better than clans and we always knew it, and now is our chance.
That was our chance. So you're just like, oh, no. Yeah, it's like, we don't need this.
We don't need more of this. Like, that's the thing. And so I'm very excited to look back on this fandom, as well as all of them when they're done, and just like see it. Like, okay, now that we're all calm, let's see what happened. And
oh, girl, I wish the calm would come. Teen Wolf has been done for months, and people are just getting more and more riled up. But I saw the funniest thing. You know, we talk about people kind of get into their, like, bitter kind of petty spots and that kind of thing. And one ship that's kind of, I won't even say that's gotten more traction, but it's gotten more traction of very specific set of people. They've started making some more content, which is SCEU, which is Scott and Theo. And when Theo was introduced, a lot of people thought that they were going to become more allies, and that this new guy was going to be a threat to Scott and Styles. And he was, but in a very villainous, overt kind of way.
Yeah.
And so we get to the point where, like, Theo at one point kills Scott. Just straight up kills him. And the whole conceit is like, oh, God, there was this whole thing where Scott is a true alpha, which, girl. And the way to take the power of a true alpha is from their beta. And so Theo had been stalking Liam and trying to convince Liam to kill Scott. And then he was going to kill Liam to get this true alpha. Well, it got to the point where that didn't work for whatever reason. And Theo was like, you know what? I'm still going to kill you. We're done. I'm just going to kill you. And so he does. And, you know, Scott's fine and all that jazz. But there are some people that have started to kind of make that a ship. But the initial fics that came out of it were very dark fic. Were very, like, just hate sex and, like, just bad fic, like, dead doves do not eat.
Yeah.
Like, all over it. And so, the real, like, the other SCEU shippers were like, no, I think that Scott would have forgave him, and, you know, I don't see enough fic like this where, you know, Theo is repentant and sorry for trying to kill Scott, and then they fall in love. You know, that kind of thing. And so they're very, very upset that that doesn't exist. So they started actually kind of creating small content for it. And so there's like a little bit of a rise in the number of fics that they had. But on top of that, you still have STEO, which is Styles and Theo.
Yeah.
Which is going to be, you know, it's Styles. It's
Theo. Styles and everybody.
Yeah, they had good scenes. People loved it and went crazy. And so they're doing this, they're like, the only relevant Theo ships that I've seen lately are SCEU, Scott and Theo, and then Theum, which is Theo and Liam.
Yeah.
Theo and Liam is really taking off, and it's becoming, like, really kind of big in and of itself. And so for them to be like, oh, SCEU is a part of this, you're like, you know, like, that's really cute. So they're like, oh, we want to have a rare pair event with pairs like STEO, which is Styles and Theo. And I'm like, that's not what you want. And again, you want to kind of warn them because you see the warning signs coming where you're like, all you're going to do is get more people writing STEO. But you don't want STEO, you want SCEU. But you don't know how to ask for it in the way that you want it because people aren't writing that, you know?
Yeah.
It's such a weird, the way that they try to convince people to kind of get into their rare pairs, and it's like, I don't know what to tell you, homie. All you can do is create for yourself and, you know, watch as it grows. A lot of people, you know, Eric is like 50,000 fics strong, but I said, we started with one. Just like everybody else started with one. We just started writing early and we wrote often. And that number, when you look at the difference in each year, it was not a steady incline. It was like 13,000, 10,000, 8,000, 6,000. And then maybe we had like another push and that kind of thing. When you look at the different months, I was like, it takes work and it takes dedication for your ship, but you have to love that ship. It can't be a spite ship. Spite ships are fun for a very, like, flash in the pan time, but they don't have a longevity. And so, like, if you want it to have longevity, it's got to be something that you're passionate about and that you really care about.
No, definitely.
Except for fandom in general.
Yeah, no, 100%. I actually need to get going, though. But we've gone for over an hour and a half, so.
I talk forever about
I know.
this. And, like, I was like, how do we segue this back to ABO? And then I was just like,
I know, it's like, it happened. It veered.
Basically, I always love talking with you, though. Like, anytime when it comes to fandom crap, I love talking about that, but I love talking with you about it, too.
Yeah, no, it's super fun. It's always really entertaining. We always hit some really fun points that a lot of people don't want to talk about, so I'm like, yes.
And, I'm here for it. I'll talk about anything. So
yeah.
Exciting. Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
No, thank you.
Anytime.
Yes. And good luck with all of the Zencaster and all of that, and let me know how that goes.
I will. Well, of course, everyone can check us out, BHAD Podcast. We're on Tumblr. Tumblr is the main one. I'm going through I'm updating our website, and so that is a project. But we started a Discord, which is a lot of fun, and if anyone is interested, come to the podcast Tumblr, and I'll shoot you an invite. It's a lot of fun. We have a lot of different channels. We talk about all nonsense. And we're doing our Teen Wolf rewatch, which is the big right now. We are on season 1, and we're going to have a live watch coming up. So everyone's invited.
Awesome. Well, thank you, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
You too. Yay.
Bye.
Bye.
So, you made it to the end. How do you feel about ABO? Is it something that you read or something that you kind of stay away from? Does it squick you out? If so, why? Let me know all of your feelings down below. I want to know. As always, you are a trooper if you made it all the way to the end. I know that these are long, but I hope also interesting. There are many more Fanversations and of course other videos coming soon, so please stay tuned. The link to my Patreon is down below if you're interested in contributing in that way or getting access to the RSS feed. So, as always, thanks so much for watching and spending some time exploring fandom with me today, and I'll see you soon. Let's get to the outro. Bye-bye. This has been Shipper's Guide to the Galaxy. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Special thanks to all of my patrons, names on the side, for helping me with this increase in videos. As mentioned, there is plenty more coming up, so please stay tuned, for there are as many ships out there as there are stars in the sky.